I stood outside my son's mansion, homeless. The same gates I had paid for now towered over me like I didn't belong there. 10 feet of iron and pride, guarding a life I built with my own hands. Yet somehow, I was the outsider. The wind cut through my coat like it knew I wasn't supposed to be wearing something so cheap. 3 days earlier, I had closets filled with silk and tailored suits. Now, I had one worn-out coat that smelled like a thrift store and regret. My fingers tightened around the handle of a scratched suitcase. Everything I chose to carry in that moment fit inside it. 40 years of building an empire, reduced to something I could drag behind me on a cracked driveway. I hadn't eaten properly in over a day, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to feel it. The hunger, the discomfort, the humiliation. Because this wasn't an accident. It was a test. And I was about to find out something most people go their entire lives never knowing. What your family does when you have nothing left to give. 3 days ago, my name was Evelyn Thorne. If you lived in Chicago, you knew it. If you worked in real estate, you feared it. I didn't just build buildings, I built power. Entire skylines carried my fingerprints. Now, according to every major headline in the country, I was finished. Bankrupt. Disgraced. Forgotten. And standing outside my own son's house, hoping he would open the door. This was all part of my plan, but I wasn't prepared for what I'd discover. Because money doesn't just change your lifestyle. It changes how people see you. And more dangerously, it reveals who they really are when it disappears. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered if the people closest to you actually love you, or just the comfort you provide? Not the version of you that's successful. Not the version that solves problems. But the version of you with nothing. No money. No influence. No safety net. Would they still open the door? Or would they look at you the way strangers do, like you're a problem they don't want to deal with? Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you isn't just my story. It's a test most families would fail. If this happened to you, would you survive it? Subscribe now. If this scares you, subscribe now. Don't wait until it's you. And if you're sitting there thinking this could never happen to you, ask yourself why. Not subscribing. Comment why you'd risk being unprepared. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand something most people learn too late. Security doesn't come from money. It comes from knowing who will stand by you when it's gone. I took a step toward the gate and pressed the intercom. My heart wasn't racing because I was nervous. It was racing because I already knew the answer might break something inside me that could never be fixed. Behind that door was my eldest son, the one who had everything because of me. And within the next few minutes, I would learn exactly what I meant to him. Without the money, without the power, without the name. By morning, a $100 million decision would destroy my family forever. But first, I had to knock. Before I stood outside that gate, I was the gate. My name didn't just open doors, it decided who was allowed to walk through them. For over 40 years, I built Thorne Enterprises from nothing but a small hardware store and a stubborn refusal to fail. I didn't inherit wealth. I created it. Brick by brick, deal by deal, I turned empty land into towers that touched the clouds. Chicago wasn't just a city to me, it was a canvas. Glass high-rises, luxury penthouses, commercial blocks that carried my name in quiet, powerful ways. People didn't always see Thorne on the buildings, but they felt it. In the price tags, in the exclusivity, in the way doors opened faster if you mentioned my name. I wore tailored suits that fit like armor, diamonds that reminded people I had nothing left to prove. Every room I entered adjusted itself around me. Control wasn't something I chased. It was something I owned. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. My husband used to say I worked like the world was about to run out of time. He balanced me. Where I was sharp, he was calm. Where I saw numbers, he saw people. He was the only person who could look at me, Not the empire, not the reputation, and remind me I was still human. Then he was gone. Just like that. No warning that mattered. No second chance to say the things that should have been said more often. The house got bigger after he died. Not physically, but in the way silence filled every corner of it. Rooms that once felt alive became places I walked through instead of lived in. Dinner tables turned into empty surfaces. Conversations turned into phone calls that ended too quickly. I still had everything. Money, power, influence. But something essential had been removed. And I replaced it the only way I knew how. By working more. By building more. By avoiding the one thing I didn't know how to fix. Loneliness. I told myself my children were my legacy. That everything I built would eventually belong to them. Not just the money, but the discipline, the standards, the strength. I was wrong. Gage, my eldest, learned one thing from me very well. How to win. But not why. He chased status the way I chased growth. Bigger houses, louder deals, more recognition. Everything in his life had to prove something to someone. Even his own home felt like a statement instead of a place to live. When he spoke to me, it was rarely about how I felt. It was about what I planned to do next, with my assets. Sloane was different, but not better. She lived for appearances. Charity galas, designer wardrobes, curated friendships that looked perfect from the outside. She had mastered the art of looking kind without ever having to sacrifice anything real. Every visit came with a request, wrapped in a smile. Every conversation circled back to what she needed. And then there was Malachi, my youngest, the one his siblings quietly dismissed, and I didn't defend enough. He didn't chase wealth. He didn't care about status. He became a teacher, something Gage once called a waste of potential at a family dinner. I didn't say anything to correct him. That silence still follows me. Malachi chose a life that didn't impress anyone in our circle. But he also chose something I didn't fully understand at the time. A life that didn't depend on approval. And then there was Clementine, Malachi's wife. The one I spent years reducing to a single label. The waitress. That's how I referred to her when she wasn't around. Sometimes, even when she was. She didn't come from wealth. She didn't speak in polished tones or wear designer labels. She laughed too easily, cooked simple meals, showed up to family gatherings without trying to impress anyone. To me, that meant one thing. She didn't belong. I convinced myself she had married into the family for security, that she saw Malachi as her way into a life she hadn't earned. So I treated her accordingly. Backhanded compliments, subtle insults, comments about her clothes, her cooking, her background. I made sure she always knew where she stood in my world. And she never fought back. Not once. She would smile, thank me, continue setting the table or serving food like my words hadn't touched her at all. At the time, I saw that as weakness. Now I know it was something else entirely. Looking back, I had built an empire that could outlast me. But I hadn't built a family that could hold me. Everything around me was strong. Except the relationships that actually mattered. I had raised children who understood value, but not loyalty. Who understood wealth, but not responsibility to others. And the one person who showed genuine kindness was the one I pushed down the most. I didn't see it then. Because success has a way of convincing you that everything you've built is right. Even when it is. For years, I ignored the signs. The distance. The way conversations felt more like transactions. The way I was needed, but never truly wanted. Until one moment forced me to stop pretending everything was fine. It wasn't a business deal. It wasn't a loss. It was something much simpler. Much quieter. And far more revealing. But everything changed the day I ended up in a hospital bed. It started with something small. At least, that's what the doctors called it. A minor cardiac episode, one of them said, like it was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. A warning, something to monitor. But when you've spent your life in control, even a small failure inside your own body feels like betrayal. I remember the ceiling more than anything else. White still, unmoving. For the first time in decades, I wasn't signing documents, making calls, or directing outcomes. I was lying still, connected to machines that beeped at steady intervals, reminding me that something inside me had nearly stopped. They kept me overnight for observation. Precaution, they said. I told my assistant not to make a big deal out of it. No press, no announcements, just inform my children. I expected concern, maybe even urgency. What I got instead was clarity. My room door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open, enough for voices to travel through without effort. At first, I didn't pay attention. Hospitals are full of noise, footsteps, conversations, movement that never really stops. But then I heard my name. She has to update the trust, Gage said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Sloane responded almost immediately. You think she hasn't already? She controls everything. She probably has it locked so tight we won't see anything until it's too late. There was a pause. Then Gage again, sharper this time. That penthouse alone is worth 8 figures. And don't forget the commercial holdings. If things aren't structured right, we could lose leverage. Leverage. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I was hearing. Not one question about how I was doing. Not one sign of concern. Just calculations. Sloane lowered her voice, but not enough. If something happens to her without adjustments, this becomes messy. I'm not sharing control with Malachi. Absolutely not. Gage let out a short breath. He won't know what to do with it anyway. We just need to make sure we're positioned correctly. Positioned. Like I was already gone. Like I wasn't 10 feet away, listening to every word. Something shifted in me in that moment. Not anger. Not even sadness. Something colder. Clearer. For years, I had convinced myself that their distance was normal, that their priorities were simply different, that success had shaped them in ways I understood. But lying in that hospital bed, listening to my children discuss my absence as an opportunity, I saw the truth without anything softening it. I wasn't their mother in that conversation. I was an asset, a number, a future transaction waiting to be finalized. And the most painful part wasn't what they said. It was how natural it sounded. No hesitation. No guilt. Just strategy. That's when the thought came to me, quiet, steady, undeniable. I hadn't raised children. I had raised vultures. I didn't confront them. I didn't call them into the room or demand an explanation. Because there was nothing left to explain. You can't force people to feel something they don't. And in that moment, I realized something else. Love that depends on benefit isn't love. It's dependency. And dependency disappears the second the benefit is gone. So I asked myself one question. A simple one. Strip everything away. What would they do? If I had nothing? No money. No power. No influence. Would they still stand by me? Or would they walk away without looking back? I needed an answer. Not assumptions. Not excuses. Proof. Be honest, would your family pass this test? Comment yes or no. Don't answer quickly. Think about it. If everything you had disappeared overnight, who would still pick up your call? Who would open their door? And who would suddenly have a reason to be busy? The next morning, I made one phone call. Not to my children. To Arthur Sterling. My lawyer, my oldest friend. The only person who had seen every version of me and never tried to take advantage of it. He answered on the second ring. Evelyn, I heard you were in the hospital. What happened? I'm fine, I said, but I need you to do something for me." There was a pause. He knew my tone. It meant I wasn't asking, I had already decided. "What do you need?" "I want everything to disappear." Silence. Then carefully, define everything. "My assets, my accounts, the company's stability. I want the world to believe it's gone." "Evelyn," he started, but I cut him off. "I'm not asking if it's possible. I'm telling you to make it happen." Arthur exhaled slowly. "This isn't small. This affects markets, reputations." "I'm aware," I said. "And your children. They'll find out the same way everyone else does." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're testing them," he said finally. "Yes. And what happens if you don't like the results?" I looked out the hospital window, watching the city I built continue without me. "Then I make sure the results have consequences." Arthur didn't argue after that. He knew better. Because when I made a decision like this, I followed through. Every time. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't building something. I was about to take everything away. Once the decision was made, there was no hesitation. I left the hospital the next day and went straight to Arthur's office. Not the public one, the private one he only used when discretion mattered more than convenience. He had already started preparing. Documents were spread across his desk. Account structures, legal pathways, layers of protection designed to move assets without attracting attention. "This has to be clean," I told him. "No loose ends, no questions that can't be answered." Arthur adjusted his glasses, studying me carefully. "If we do this, you disappear on paper, completely. It has to look real, not just to the public, but to regulators, partners, everyone." That's the point. We began with liquidity. Every accessible dollar was moved into a private offshore trust, structured so tightly that even the most aggressive audit wouldn't trace it back to me without years of investigation. Properties were reassigned through shell entities. Investments were rerouted. Holdings were redistributed across networks designed to look like collapse instead of control. Piece by piece, my empire vanished. At least, that's what it would look like. The next step wasn't financial. It was narrative. Because money disappearing isn't enough. People need a reason to believe it. Arthur reached out to the right channels, quietly. Analysts, journalists, industry insiders who were always looking for the next major story. A few carefully placed leaks were all it took. Questions about irregularities. Whispers of mismanaged funds. Hints of investigations that hadn't been confirmed, but sounded convincing enough. Within days, speculation turned into headlines. THORNE, enterprises under scrutiny. Then, THORNE, empire facing possible collapse. And finally, EVNLYN, THORNE reported bankrupt. I watched it unfold from a distance. Years of reputation, reduced to a headline people scrolled past in seconds. That's how fast perception changes. The hardest part wasn't moving money. It was removing who I had become. I stood in my dressing room that night, surrounded by everything that once defined me. Designer suits arranged by color. Shoes I had worn into boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. Jewelry that had been passed down, upgraded, and displayed as proof of success. I reached for my ring first. A diamond worth more than most people's homes. I slid it off slowly and placed it in a small hidden compartment inside an old suitcase. One by one, the rest followed. Watches, bracelets, earrings. Each item removed felt like peeling away a layer I had worn for decades. Then came the clothes. I didn't pack them. I left them exactly where they were. Because the version of me who wore them wasn't walking out that door. The next morning, I went somewhere I had never stepped into before. A thrift store. No assistant, no driver, no announcement of who I was. Just me, walking through narrow aisles filled with things people had given up. I picked a coat that didn't fit quite right, shoes that had already lived someone else's life, a sweater that felt thin against the cold. At the register, the woman didn't look at me twice. No recognition. No hesitation. Just a total of less than what I used to spend on lunch. That's when it hit me. Without the signals of wealth, you disappear. Not slowly. Immediately. Back at the house, I made the last adjustments. Phones disconnected. Accounts frozen. Access points erased. Even the staff was informed through official channels that operations had been suspended indefinitely. I didn't say goodbye, because goodbyes invite questions, and questions lead to doubt. I left my keys on the marble countertop in the foyer, the same place I had placed them thousands of times before. Only this time, I wasn't coming back. When I walked out of that house, no one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. No one noticed the difference. I stepped onto the street and raised my hand for a taxi. Not a private car. Not a driver waiting by schedule. Just a simple ride, like anyone else. As I sat in the back seat, watching the city move around me without reacting to my presence, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not regret. Something closer to clarity. Because for the first time in years, I was about to see the truth without influence. I gave the driver my first destination. My eldest son's house. The one I had gifted him. The one built with my money. The one he proudly called his own. I looked down at my worn coat, then at my hands, empty, unrecognizable even to me. And I realized something as the car pulled away. I was about to knock on 3 doors. Only one mattered. The taxi slowed as it turned into a long, curved driveway. Even from a distance, I recognized every detail. The stonework, the iron gates, the perfectly trimmed hedges that lined the path like silent guards. I had chosen all of it. Designed it. Paid for it. Gage called it his home. But standing there now, stepping out of a basic taxi with a worn suitcase in my hand, it didn't feel like something I had given. It felt like something I had lost. The gate stood tall in front of me, closed. Not welcoming. Not familiar. Just closed. I adjusted the sleeve of my coat, suddenly aware of how thin it felt against the cold air. My reflection stared back at me through the polished surface of the intercom panel. I barely recognized the woman looking back. No makeup. Hair unkempt. Clothes that carried no signal of status. Just a tired figure standing where she used to belong. I pressed the button. A voice came through the speaker. Yes. Not warmth. Not surprise. Just routine. It's Evelyn, I said, letting my voice weaken slightly. I need to see my son. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. The kind of silence that tells you someone is deciding how much effort you're worth. Then a soft buzz. The gates opened. Slowly. I stepped forward, pulling the suitcase behind me as the gravel shifted beneath my feet. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of the distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. The front doors stood tall, polished, untouched by the cold outside. I reached them and knocked. Once. Twice. Then I waited. The door opened, just enough for him to see me. Gage stood there, perfectly put together. Cashmere sweater, pressed trousers, not a single detail out of place. For a brief second, his eyes widened. Not with relief. Not with concern. With confusion. Then quickly, calculation. Mother, he said. Not mom. Not warmth. Just acknowledgement. His eyes moved over me, slow, assessing. The coat. The suitcase. The lack of everything he was used to seeing. The news, he continued. It's everywhere. They're saying the company collapsed, that there's an investigation. Is it true? No, are you okay? No, what happened? Just confirmation. I lowered my gaze slightly. It's all gone, Gage, I said quietly. Every cent. The bank took the house this morning. I don't have anywhere to go. I let the silence sit between us. Waiting. Hopping, just for a moment, that something human would appear on his face. It didn't. Gage stepped outside, but only halfway. Just enough to keep the door behind him. Closed. I don't understand how this could happen, he said, more to himself than to me. You had everything secured. This doesn't make sense. It happened, I replied, and I need somewhere to stay just for a few weeks, until I figure things out. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. This is complicated. Complicated. I stood there in the cold, holding everything I had left. And I was complicated. Gage, I said, softer now, I'm your mother. I know that, he snapped, his tone tightening. But you have to understand my position. Position. There are people watching me right now, investors, partners. If they see you here like this, it raises questions. It connects me to the situation. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain. Recognition. This could damage deals I've been working on for months, he continued. You showing up like this, it puts me in a difficult spot. A difficult spot. I nodded slowly. Because now, I understood exactly where I stood in his world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Not to invite me in. Not to help with my suitcase. But to solve the problem quickly. I'll cover a hotel for you, he said. 2 nights, somewhere discreet. That should give you enough time to figure out your next move. 2 nights. I looked at the bills in his hand. Crisp, clean, detached from meaning. I don't need a hotel, I said quietly. I need my son. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he stepped closer and pressed the money into my hand. I can't have this situation affecting my reputation, he said. You understand that, right? I stared at him. At the man I had raised. The one who learned how to negotiate, how to protect his interests from me. But never learned when not to. This isn't permanent, he added. You just need to handle it quietly. Handle it. Like I was a problem. Not a person. I didn't take the money. It sat between us for a second, before he dropped it into my hand anyway. A forced solution. A quick fix. An exit strategy. I'll have my assistant send you some options, he said, already stepping backward. Just try to stay out of sight for a while. Out of sight. The door began to close. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. Decisively. And just before it shut completely, he added, I hope you understand. Then the door closed. The click of the lock was louder than it should have been. Sharp. Final. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. The same door I had walked through countless times without knocking. The same house I had handed to him without hesitation. Now closed to me. Because I no longer brought value. The wind picked up again, brushing against my coat as if reminding me I was still outside. Still unwanted. Still alone. I looked down at the money in my hand. Then slowly folded my fingers around it. Not because I needed it, but because it was the only thing my son was willing to give me. I turned away from the door and walked back down the driveway. Each step felt lighter. Not because things had improved, but because something inside me had settled. The question I came here to ask had been answered. Clearly. Without confusion. Without hesitation. And now I had one less illusion to hold on to. I reached the gate just as it closed behind me. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one cared that I was leaving. He chose status over blood. Don't miss what the next one did. Because what happened at the next door was worse. I didn't take another taxi. Not after Gage. I walked. At first, it was just to clear my head. Then it became something else. Each step through the city felt different now, like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time. These streets used to respond to me. Doormen nodded. Managers adjusted their tone. Conversations shifted when I entered a room. Now, no one looked twice. People passed by without slowing down. A woman brushed past me without apology. A man stepped around me like I was something to avoid. The city hadn't changed. I had. Or rather, what people believed about me had. By the time I reached Sloane's building, my legs ached and the cold had settled into my bones. I stood across the street for a moment, looking up at the glass tower that stretched into the sky. I had helped her choose it. Location, design, status. Everything about it was meant to signal success. And now I was about to walk in, without any of the things that made me welcome there. The lobby was exactly as I remembered. Marble floors polished to a shine, soft lighting, a quiet kind of luxury that didn't need to announce itself loudly. But something was different. No one greeted me. The front desk attendant glanced in my direction, then looked away. No smile, no recognition. Just a quick assessment followed by disinterest. I stepped forward anyway. "I'm here to see Sloane Thorne," I said. The attendant hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "Appointment?" I almost laughed. "No," I replied. "Just let her know her mother is here." That got a reaction. Not respect. Confusion. He picked up the phone, clearly unsure, and spoke quietly into it. I stood there, holding my suitcase, aware of how out of place I looked in a room designed for people who had never known discomfort. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and Sloane stepped out. She looked exactly how I expected. Perfect. Every detail carefully chosen. Hair styled, makeup flawless, a dress that probably cost more than what most people make in a month. But the moment her eyes landed on me, that perfection cracked. "Mom," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. Not concern. Not relief. Just shock, mixed with something else. Something closer to embarrassment. "What are you doing here?" she asked quickly, stepping closer but keeping a slight distance. "I told you I had plans tonight." "Plans?" I tightened my grip on the suitcase. "I saw the news," she continued, lowering her voice. "My phone has been blowing up all day. People are asking questions. It's a mess." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I'm here." She glanced around the lobby, checking who might be watching. "Sloane," I said, softer now, "I need your help." That made her freeze. Not because she didn't hear me. Because she understood exactly what I was asking. "I can't do this right now," she said, shaking her head slightly. "You have no idea what this looks like." "What does it look like?" I asked. "It looks like I'm connected to this whole situation," she replied quickly. "Do you understand how damaging that is? My reputation matters." There it was again. Reputation. Different child. Same priority. "I just need a place to stay," I said. "Your guest room." "I don't have a guest room anymore," she interrupted. "I turned it into a wellness space. It's not set up for this." "For this?" "For me." I let that settle. "You always taught us to be independent," she continued, her tone shifting slightly, like she was justifying herself. "To handle our own problems, remember." I did. I remembered saying it. I just never thought she would use it like this. "This is your situation," she added. "You need to manage it." Manage it. Just like Gage said. Different words. Same meaning. She reached into her purse. For a moment, I thought maybe this was where something would change. Maybe she would reconsider. Maybe she would step closer instead of further away. Instead, she pulled out a small plastic card. "A bus pass." She placed it in my hand like it was a solution. "This will get you around the city," she said. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here. It's clean. I donate there every year." I stared at the card. Light. Simple. Worth almost nothing. "This should help you for now," she added, already stepping back. "Just tell them I sent you. They might give you better accommodations." Better accommodations. At a shelter. I looked up at her. At my daughter. The one I had given everything to. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to move me somewhere I wouldn't affect her. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, glancing toward the entrance where a car had just pulled up. "I have to go," she said quickly. "I'm already late." Then she paused, just long enough to say one final thing. "Tell the shelter I sent you." No hesitation. No softness. Just a clean exit. And then she walked away. Not looking back. Not checking if I was okay. Just walking toward the life I had paid for, without me in it. I stood there in the lobby, long after she left. The bus pass still in my hand. People moved around me like I didn't exist. Conversations continued. Doors opened and closed. Life carried on uninterrupted. I looked down at the card again. Then slowly closed my hand around it. Not because I needed it, but because it represented something I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't stress. This was choice. They had both made it. Clearly. Without hesitation. What would you do in that moment? Stand there and accept it. Walk away and never come back. Or say something you can't take back. Be honest. Because it's easy to judge from the outside. It's harder when you're the one holding the truth in your hands and realizing it's not what you hoped for. I walked out of the building without a destination. No plan. No one to call. The city moved around me the same way it always had. Cars passing, people talking, lights changing. But none of it felt connected to me anymore. A few hours ago, I still had options. Or at least, I believed I did. Now, each step felt heavier than the last, not because I was tired, but because something inside me had shifted. Not broken. Settled. There's a difference. When hope disappears suddenly, it hurts. But when it fades piece by piece, replaced by truth, it leaves something quieter behind. Something harder to ignore. I kept walking until the noise of the streets softened, until the buildings gave way to a small park tucked between rows of apartments. I didn't choose it for comfort. I chose it because it was empty. The bench was cold. Wood worn down from years of use, metal edges carrying the chill of the evening air. I sat anyway. The suitcase rested beside me, the only thing that still belonged to me in any clear way. For a while, I just stared ahead. No thoughts. No movement. Just stillness. People passed by occasionally, some alone, some in pairs, none of them paying attention to the woman sitting quietly with everything she had left at her side. That used to bother me. Being unnoticed. Now it felt fitting. Because the version of me they would have recognized was gone. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had signed contracts worth millions. The same hands that had built something powerful enough to shape lives. Now holding nothing. No ring. No symbol of success. Just skin and silence. Gage's voice echoed in my mind. My reputation. Sloane followed. I can't do this right now. Different words. Same message. You are no longer useful. I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the bench. For years, I told myself I had built something meaningful. That everything I created would stand as proof that I had done something right. But sitting there, in the cold with nowhere to go, the truth felt different. Clearer. Stronger than anything I had convinced myself of before. I built their world, and they erased me from it. There were no tears at first, just a quiet acceptance that settled deeper with every passing minute. I thought back to the years of effort, the sacrifices, the decisions made in the name of building something lasting. All the times I chose work over presence, structure over softness, control over connection. I told myself it was necessary, that one day they would understand, that one day it would all make sense. But sitting there, with nothing left to offer them, I realized something I had avoided for a long time. They didn't misunderstand me. They learned from me. They learned that value comes first, that everything else is secondary. And now, they were living exactly by that lesson. The air grew colder as the sun lowered behind the buildings. I pulled my coat tighter around me, not for comfort, but out of habit. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to ask a different question. Not about them. About me. What had I missed? What had I ignored? And more importantly, what had I done to contribute to this? Because blame is easy. Understanding is harder. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This test wasn't just about them. It was about facing the truth I had avoided. I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of the folded paper Arthur had given me. Still there. Still untouched. A reminder that this story wasn't finished yet. There was one more door. One more chance to see something different. Or confirm everything I had already learned. I picked up my suitcase and stood from the bench. My body felt tired, but my mind clear. Then I went to the one person I had treated the worst. The bus ride felt longer than it should have. Not because of distance, because of what waited at the end of it. I sat near the back, my suitcase tucked beside me, the quiet hum of the engine filling the space where my thoughts tried to settle. The city changed as we moved farther out, tall buildings giving way to smaller homes, polished streets replaced by uneven pavement. This was not a part of the city I visited often. Not because I couldn't, because I chose not to. Malachi had invited me many times. I always found a reason to decline. Too busy. Too far. Not convenient. The truth was simpler. It didn't fit the image I had built for myself. And now, it was the only place left to go. When the bus finally stopped, I stepped off and looked around. Streetlights flickered overhead. Lawns were uneven. Paint chipped on fences that had seen better years. Nothing about this place spoke of status. But something about it felt steady. Real in a way I hadn't appreciated before. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and began walking. Each step brought me closer to the last door I had to face. The house was exactly where I remembered it. Small. Pale blue paint, slightly faded. A front porch that leaned just enough to show time had passed without repair. A single light glowed from the kitchen window, casting a soft warmth into the night. I stopped at the edge of the walkway. For a moment, I didn't move. Because this was different. Not like Gage's mansion. Not like Sloane's tower. This door carried something heavier than rejection. It carried memory. The last time I had stood here, I had complained about the neighborhood. About the size of the house. About how Malachi had settled. And Clementine. I had made sure she heard every word. Now I stood there, wearing clothes that barely protected me from the cold, holding everything I had left in one hand. Asking for help from the people I had treated the worst. Shame has weight. And in that moment, it pressed down harder than anything I had felt all day. I raised my hand. Hesitated. Then knocked. Footsteps moved quickly inside. No delay. No hesitation. The door opened wide. Clementine stood there, a dish towel in her hand, her hair pulled back loosely, her expression shifting the moment she saw me. "Evelyn," she said, her voice filled with surprise. Not judgment. Not discomfort. Just surprise. Her eyes moved over me, taking in the coat, the suitcase, the exhaustion I couldn't hide. And something changed in her expression. Not suspicion. Concern. "Oh my, come in," she said immediately, stepping aside and opening the door wider. "You're freezing." She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't question what had happened. She didn't hesitate. She reached for my suitcase before I could respond, pulling it gently from my hand. "Malachi," she called out, "your mom is here." Warm air wrapped around me as I stepped inside. For the first time that day, I wasn't standing in the cold. Malachi appeared from the hallway, his glasses slightly crooked, his expression shifting the moment he saw me. "Mom," he said, quickly closing the distance between us. He didn't stop to analyze. Didn't ask about the headlines. Didn't measure what I had left. He just hugged me. Tightly. Like nothing had changed. "I tried calling you," he said, pulling back just enough to look at me. "Your phone was off. We were worried." Worried. The word landed differently than anything I had heard all day. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice catching in a way I hadn't allowed before. "I didn't know where else to go." "You don't have to explain anything," he replied. "You're here now, that's what matters." Clementine moved around the kitchen quietly, already pulling out a chair. "Sit down," she said gently. "I'll get you something warm." No questions. No conditions. Just action. I lowered myself into the chair, the simple act of sitting in that space feeling unfamiliar in a way I couldn't fully explain. The kitchen was small. The floors showed wear. The cabinets didn't match perfectly. But none of that mattered. Because for the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't felt anywhere else. Safe. Clementine placed a bowl in front of me. Steam rose from the surface, carrying the scent of vegetables and broth. Simple. Nothing extravagant. But in that moment, it felt like more than food. It felt like care. "Eat," she said softly. I picked up the spoon slowly, my hands still adjusting to the warmth of the room. The first bite settled something inside me I hadn't realized was unsettled. Not hunger. Something deeper. Comfort. Across the table, Malachi watched quietly, not with expectation but with concern. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "We'll figure everything out." No hesitation. No calculation. Just certainty. I looked between them. At the way they moved. The way they spoke. There was no performance here. No image to maintain. Just people, responding to someone who needed help. And for the first time, I understood something I had missed for years. This wasn't lack. This was enough. I thought about Gage's house. The size. The perfection. The distance. Then Sloane's building. The elegance. The control. The coldness. And now this. A small kitchen. Two people who didn't have much, yet gave everything without hesitation. No one here cared about how this looked. No one here asked what they would gain. They didn't check who might be watching. They didn't protect an image. They simply responded. Without delay. Without question. Without condition. And that difference was impossible to ignore. For years, I had measured success in numbers. In growth. In influence. But sitting there, holding a warm bowl in my hands, those measures felt incomplete. Because none of them had answered the one question that mattered most. Who shows up when you have nothing? Clementine sat across from me, resting her arms lightly on the table. "You look tired," she said gently. "After you eat, you should rest. The guest room isn't big, but it's warm." Guest room. A space made for someone else. Given without hesitation. "I don't want to be a burden," I said. "You're not," she replied immediately. No pause. No doubt. Malachi nodded. Your family. Family. The words settled differently here. Not as something expected, but as something lived. I lowered my gaze, feeling the weight of everything I had said to her in the past. The way I had dismissed her, reduced her, judged her, and yet, she was the one opening her home to me, without reminding me of any of it, without making me earn it. That night, as I sat in that small kitchen, finishing the last of the soup, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I had spent years building a world where everything had value, but I had overlooked the one thing that couldn't be measured. And now, sitting in a house I once looked down on, I was finally beginning to understand it. Not through success, not through control, but through something much simpler. Something I had nearly lost the chance to recognize. And as the night settled around us, I had no idea that the real test wasn't over yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Clementine had shown me to the guest room, a small space with a neatly made bed, soft lighting, and a folded blanket placed carefully at the edge. Simple, thoughtful, more than I deserved. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. A faucet turning off, soft footsteps across the hallway, low voices from the kitchen. At first, I tried to ignore it. It wasn't my place to listen. Not after everything I had said to them in the past. But the walls were thin, and their voices carried. Not loudly, just enough. Enough for me to hear what I wasn't meant to. We don't have enough. Malachi's voice. Low. Tired. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders as I focused on the sound. I can pick up extra classes, he continued. Maybe tutoring on weekends, it'll help. There was a pause. Then Clementine. You're already working too much. I'll manage. Another pause. Longer this time. Then her voice again, softer. What about rent? Silence answered that question. Heavy. Honest. We'll figure it out, Malachi said finally. We always do. I moved closer to the door, not opening it, just enough to hear more clearly. This is different, Clementine replied. We weren't planning for this. For me. I closed my eyes for a moment. Listening. Feeling every word settle deeper than anything I had experienced all day. I don't want her to feel like a burden, Malachi said. She won't, Clementine answered immediately. But she is, he replied quietly. At least financially, we were already tight this month. Tight. Because of me. I leaned against the wall, my hand resting against the doorframe. For years, I had spoken about numbers without emotion. Profit margins. Expenses. Risk. Now, for the first time, I was on the other side of that equation. Not as the one making decisions, but as the cost. And it felt heavier than anything I had carried before. You don't have to fix everything overnight, Clementine said gently. We just need to get through this week first. A week. That's all they were thinking about. Not long-term gain. Not positioning. Just survival. And somehow, they were still choosing to help me. There was a quiet rustling sound. Then Clementine spoke again. I have something. Malachi sighed softly. We've talked about this. Just listen, she said. I heard a drawer open. Then close. A small pause. I can sell this. My breath caught before I even knew what she was holding. No, Malachi said immediately. Absolutely not. It's just a ring, she replied. Not just any ring. I knew that tone. The quiet strength behind it. That ring matters, he said. It's not something we just give up. We're not giving it up, she answered. We're using it, there's a difference. Silence followed. The kind that comes when one person is trying to protect something, and the other is trying to protect someone. We need money, she continued. For food, for bills, for her. For me. I pressed my hand against my mouth, holding back a reaction I couldn't control. Malachi's voice softened. I'll figure something else out. You always say that, Clementine replied gently. And you always do, but this time we don't have to wait. Another pause. Then she said the words I will never forget. Money is just paper. People are what matter. No hesitation. No doubt. Just truth. Simple. Clear. And stronger than anything I had built in my entire life. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since this began, the weight I had been holding broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind me that I was still human. I stepped back from the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. My chest felt tight. Not from pain. From realization. Everything I had believed about value was being rewritten in a house I once dismissed. They didn't have enough. Not by any standard I used to measure. And yet, they were willing to give up something meaningful without hesitation. Not for gain. Not for recognition. But because someone they loved needed help. Even when that person had failed them. Even when that person had never shown them the same level of care. I returned to the bed and sat down slowly, staring at my hands again. Empty, but no longer numb. I thought about the ring on my finger earlier that day. The one I removed without hesitation. A symbol of wealth, status, power. And now, Clementine was willing to give up hers. Not because she had plenty, but because she had enough heart to act when it mattered. That difference was everything. Would you make that sacrifice? Tell me below. Not when it's easy. Not when you have extra. But when it actually costs you something. Would you still choose someone else over your own comfort? Be honest. Most people fail this moment. Subscribe if you wouldn't. Because it's easy to say you'd help. Until helping means giving something up. If you're not subscribing, explain why in the comments. What would stop you? What would you hold on to instead? I woke up earlier than the rest of the house. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The room was unfamiliar, smaller than what I was used to, but warmer in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Then it came back. The night. The conversation. The ring. I sat up slowly, the events of the past day settling into place with a clarity that felt almost heavy. Everything had changed. Not just what I knew about my children, but what I understood about myself. From the kitchen, I could hear soft movement, the sound of something simmering, cabinets opening and closing with care, not urgency. Normal life. Despite everything. I stood, adjusted the borrowed sweater Clementine had left for me, and stepped into the hallway. This house didn't carry tension. It carried effort. And somehow, that made what I knew was coming feel even sharper. Clementine stood at the stove, stirring something slowly, her movements steady and unhurried. She looked over her shoulder when she heard me. "Good morning," she said, smiling softly. "I hope you slept a little." I nodded, better than I expected. Malachi sat at the small table, flipping through a stack of papers, lesson plans, from the look of it. "Morning, Mom," he said, offering a quick smile. "We were just talking about how to rearrange things a bit, make space more comfortable for you." Make space. For me. The words settled differently now. "I won't be here long," I said quietly. Clementine turned slightly. "You can stay as long as you need." No hesitation. No reconsideration. Just the same steady kindness. I opened my mouth to respond. But a knock at the door interrupted the moment. Firm. Precise. Not rushed. But not casual either. Every sound in the room paused. Malachi stood first, glancing toward the door. "I'll get it," he said, setting his papers aside. I remained where I was, my hands resting lightly against the edge of the counter. Because I already knew who it was. The timing was exact. Intentional. Malachi opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked. A familiar voice answered. "Yes, I'm looking for Evelyn Thorne." There was a brief pause. Then Malachi stepped aside. Arthur Sterling walked in, dressed the same as always. Clean lines, composed expression, presence that didn't need to be announced. But in this house, he looked out of place. Not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Control. Structure. The world I had stepped away from. His eyes met mine. No surprise. No confusion. Just acknowledgement. "It's time," he said. Clementine glanced between us, her expression uncertain. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Arthur gave a polite nod. "Everything is about to be clarified." Clarified. A simple word. But it carried weight. Malachi stepped closer. "Mom, what's going on?" I looked at him. At the concern in his face. The same concern he had shown me from the moment I arrived. And for a brief second, I considered delaying it. Giving them more time. But truth doesn't wait. Not when it's already in motion. Before I could respond, another sound cut through the room. A car door slamming outside. Then another. Quick footsteps. Urgent. Uncontrolled. And then, a loud knock. Harder this time. Demanding. The door didn't wait to be opened. It pushed inward before Malachi could reach it again. Gage stepped inside first, followed closely by Sloane. Both of them looked exactly like they had the day before. Perfect. Composed. But their energy had changed. Tight. Agitated. Eyes scanning the room quickly, landing on me, then Arthur, then the small space around them like they were trying to make sense of something that didn't fit. "What is this?" Gage demanded. Sloane crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "We got a call this morning, something about a legal review. Why are you here?" she asked, looking directly at Arthur. The calm that filled the house just minutes ago was gone, replaced by tension that didn't belong in the space. And for the first time since they arrived, they looked uncertain. Arthur adjusted his cuff slightly, his voice measured. "Everyone is here," he said. Not a question. A statement. I stepped forward slowly, feeling every pair of eyes shift toward me. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like everything was closing in, round a single moment. This was it. The line between what they believed and what was real. And as I looked at each of them, I realized something quietly. They still thought they understood the situation. They had no idea what was coming. The room held still. Not quiet in a peaceful way. Tight. Expectant. Gage stood near the door, his posture rigid, eyes locked on Arthur. Sloane hovered just behind him, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. Malachi and Clementine remained near the table, confused but calm. And me. I stepped forward. Not as the woman who arrived with nothing, but as the one who had set all of this in motion. Arthur reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. No rush. No performance. Just precision. "I believe it's time we address the situation," he said. Gage scoffed lightly. "Yes, I'd like that explained, because from what we've seen, everything collapsed overnight." Sloane nodded. "If there's legal exposure, we need to understand where we stand." Where we stand. I almost smiled. Because that question was about to answer itself. Arthur opened the folder and removed a set of documents. "Thorne Enterprises has not collapsed," he said evenly. The words landed, but didn't settle immediately. Gage frowned, That's not what's being reported. Correct, Arthur replied. What's being reported was intentional. Silence. Then Sloane stepped forward. Intentional, what does that mean? It means, Arthur continued, that every financial shift, every public statement, every reported loss was part of a controlled restructuring. Gage's expression hardened. You're saying none of this is real. I stepped in before Arthur could answer. It's real enough to reveal the truth, I said. All eyes turned to me. And this time, they weren't looking at someone in need. They were looking at someone they didn't fully understand anymore. I wasn't bankrupt, I continued. I was watching. Gage let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Watching what? You, I said. The word landed clean. Sharp. Unavoidable. Sloane shook her head. This isn't funny. It wasn't meant to be, I replied. I took another step forward, my voice steady. I needed to know something, not based on assumptions, not based on appearances. I needed proof. Proof of what? Gage snapped. Of who would stand with me when I had nothing. The room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Because now they understood. At least enough to feel it. I went to you first, I said, looking directly at Gage. I stood at your door, told you everything was gone, and asked for help. His jaw tightened. You offered me money, I continued. 2 nights in a hotel, not a place in your home, not a moment of concern, just a solution that kept me out of sight. That's not, he started. It is exactly what it was, I said, cutting him off. No raised voice. No anger. Just clarity. Then I turned to Sloane. I went to you next. Her posture shifted slightly, but she held her ground. You looked at me and saw a problem, I said. Not a person, not your mother, a problem to manage. That's not fair, she replied quickly. You showed up without warning in the middle of a crisis. And you gave me a bus pass, I said. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. You told me to go to a shelter, I continued. To tell them you sent me. Sloane's expression tightened. I was trying to help. No, I said calmly. You were trying to move me somewhere I wouldn't affect you. Her lips parted slightly. But no words followed. Because there was nothing left to argue. Not when the truth had already been lived. Finally, I turned back toward the table. Toward Malachi. Toward Clementine. I came here last, I said. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. I brought nothing with me, I continued. No money, no explanation, no promise that anything would improve. I paused briefly. You didn't ask for any of that. Clementine's eyes softened slightly, but she said nothing. You opened the door, I said. You brought me inside. You gave me warmth, food, a place to rest. Malachi shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, I replied gently, because what you did matters. I looked at Clementine. And you were willing to give up something even more. Her expression changed slightly. Just enough. Because she knew what I meant. I heard your conversation last night, I said. Malachi froze. Clementine looked down briefly. You were struggling, I continued. You didn't have enough, and still you chose to help me. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to defend themselves. Because there was nothing to defend. You offered your ring, I said, my voice softer now. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Clementine finally looked up. And for the first time since I arrived, there was uncertainty in her eyes. Arthur stepped forward again, placing a single document on the table. Then another. And finally, a check. Clean. Precise. Unmistakable. I reached for it and turned it toward Clementine. Her eyes moved across the paper slowly. Then stopped. Her breath caught. Evelyn, she whispered. This is yours, I said. She shook her head immediately. No, I can't. Yes, you can, I replied. And you will. Gage stepped forward sharply. What is that? I didn't look at him. A transfer, I said calmly. $100 million. The room changed instantly. Not slowly. All at once. What? Sloane said, her voice barely controlled. Gage moved closer. That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense, I replied. Because for the first time, everything was being assigned exactly where it belonged. Subsection 11H. Final line of the reveal, tilde 150 words. I looked at all of them. At the contrast standing in front of me. Two who had everything and chose distance. Two who had little and chose to give. This was never about money, I said. It was about truth. I let the words settle, then added calmly. And now we all have it. For a moment, no one moved. Clementine still held the check, her hands slightly unsteady, her eyes locked on the number as if it might change if she looked away. Malachi stood beside her, silent, trying to process what had just happened. And across the room, Gage and Sloane. The composure they walked in with was gone. What is this? Gage demanded, his voice rising now, no longer controlled. You're giving her that after everything. Sloane stepped forward quickly. This has to be a mistake. There are legal structures, distributions. This isn't how any of this works. Arthur didn't respond. Because this wasn't a discussion. It was a conclusion. Gage looked at me again, his expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. You're serious? He asked. I held his gaze. Completely. Yes. That doesn't make any sense, Sloane said, her voice tightening. We're your children. The word landed differently now. Not as a bond. As a claim. And what does that mean? I asked calmly. She hesitated, caught off guard by the question. It means this belongs to us, to the family. The family, I repeated. Gage stepped in, his tone firmer now. We've always been part of the business, the decisions, the growth. You can't just cut us out because of one situation. One situation. I let that settle for a moment. Then I spoke. This wasn't one moment, I said. It was the moment that revealed everything else. Silence followed. Because they understood exactly what I meant. Gage straightened slightly, trying to regain control. If this is about what happened yesterday, fine, he said. We could have handled it differently, but that doesn't justify something like this. Handled it differently. After the fact. After the truth had already been shown. Sloane nodded quickly. We didn't know the full situation. You showed up without context. Anyone would have reacted the same way. No, I replied. Just one word. Clear. Steady. Not anyone. I turned slightly toward Malachi and Clementine. They didn't. The room shifted again. Not in volume. In weight. Because now the contrast wasn't implied. It was undeniable. Gage's expression hardened again, but this time, there was something else beneath it. Not control. Not confidence. Fear. So that's it, he asked. You're just going to walk away from us. I didn't answer immediately. Because the question deserved clarity. I'm not walking away, I said finally. I'm accepting what you already showed me. Sloane shook her head. That's not fair. Fair, I repeated. You measured me by what I could give you, I continued. And the moment that disappeared, so did your loyalty. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't interrupt. Because she couldn't. I didn't remove myself from your lives, I added quietly. You removed me from your priorities. Gage stepped forward again, frustration breaking through completely now. You're making a mistake, he said. This is emotional, you'll regret it. I looked at him. At the son, who had learned how to protect everything. Except what mattered most. Then I glanced down briefly at the floor near the doorway. where traces of dirt had been dragged in from outside. Worn marks, out of place in this small, clean home. I met his eyes again. Calm, unmoved. "You're staining the floor." The words landed exactly as intended. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. Silence followed. Heavy, complete. For the first time since they arrived. Gage and Sloane had nothing to say. No argument. No leverage. No control. Because everything they relied on, status, position, expectation, had been removed from the equation. And without it, there was nothing left to stand on. Sloane turned first, her movements tight, controlled only on the surface. Gage followed shortly after, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. The door closed behind them. Not slammed, just shut. And with it, so was that chapter. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter, just settled. Like something heavy had finally been removed. No one spoke immediately. Clementine still sat at the table, the check resting carefully in front of her, untouched now. Malachi stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, his focus shifting between me and the paper that had changed everything. I took a slow breath. Not because I needed to steady myself, but because, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to control what came next. "I didn't do this to hurt them," I said finally. My voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was honest. I needed to know who would still see me when everything else was gone. Malachi exhaled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't have to test us," he said, not accusing, just thoughtful. "We would have helped you anyway." I looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his voice. "I know that now," I replied. Clementine glanced between us before speaking. "We didn't do anything special," she said gently. "You needed help, so we helped." Nothing special. That was how they saw it. No performance. No expectation of reward. Just action. I shook my head slightly. "It was more than that," I said. "You gave without asking what you'd get back. That's rare." Malachi smiled faintly. "That's just how we live." Just how we live. Simple words. But they carried something I had spent years overlooking. Clementine pushed the check slightly forward across the table. "I can't take this," she said quietly. I expected that. "You can," I replied. "No," she insisted gently. "We didn't help you for money." "I know," I said. "And that's exactly why you should have it." She hesitated. Malachi looked at her, then back at me. "This is too much," he said. "We don't need this." I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. "It's not about need," I said. "It's about recognition." They exchanged a glance. Not excited. Not overwhelmed. Just uncertain. Because they had never placed value on things the way I had. And that, more than anything, confirmed I had made the right decision. I looked around the room again. The same space I once judged without understanding. Now it felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. For years, I built a life around control. Around growth. Around making sure everything expanded, improved, advanced. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what any of it was for. I thought success meant having more. More influence. More security. More distance from struggle. But sitting there, in a house that had none of those things by my old standards, I saw something I hadn't recognized before. Connection. Care. Presence. The kind of things that don't increase on a balance sheet, but define everything that matters. "I spent my life protecting what I built," I said slowly. "But I didn't protect what mattered inside it." Malachi and Clementine listened quietly. No interruption. No correction. Just attention. I let the words settle before finishing. I lost money. I paused. Not for effect, but because the truth deserved space. But found my family. No one responded immediately. Because they didn't need to. The meaning was already clear. That day didn't end with celebration. No raised voices. No dramatic moments. Just quiet understanding. The kind that stays longer than anything loud ever could. I didn't walk out of that house with more control. I walked out with something better. Something I hadn't realized I was missing. And as I stood there, looking at the two people who chose me when I had nothing, one truth settled in completely. The poorest house gave me the richest life. Stories like this happen every day. Not always with money, but always with choices. Subscribe so you don't miss the ones that matter.